Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. And thank you for the opportunity to be with you all today and talk about the importance of climate risk disclosure, which I know is of deep interest to everyone in this room. I want to thank the Tokyo Stock Exchange and the Exchange Group for hosting us today, and for all of you, so many of you, for being here. I'm also grateful to the JFSA for their leadership and engagement on this topic and for organizing this event. Whether you represent a corporation, an asset owner or manager, a bank or insurer or a government agency, you understand that climate risk has become a top risk globally. Climate change is likely to have an impact across many economic sectors. It has already brought more extreme and uncertain weather, and it has the potential to weaken economic growth, including through damage to capital stock, labor supply, and depressed returns. In a May 2018 study, Stanford University scientists calculated that even if the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement are achieved, global GDP could fall 15% from 2010 levels. If temperatures were to rise 3 degrees centigrade, they calculated that global GDP could fall 25%. If no action is taken regarding climate change and temperatures rise by 4% or more, 4 degrees or more, global GDP could decline by more than 30%. An Economist Intelligence Unit report found that the estimated value at risk as a result of climate change to the global stock of manageable assets ranges from $4.2 trillion to $43 trillion between now and the end of the century. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report issued in October tells us we have just 12 years to limit catastrophic climate change. Sea level rise, destruction of coral reefs, killing heat waves, habitat destruction, water stress, and species extinction are in our future if we are unable to limit global warming. Thus, the importance of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and fulfilling the commitments of the Paris Agreement had never been more apparent, and not just for social or environmental reasons, but for fiduciary ones. While the public sector has made and will continue to make very important contributions, it will truly be the efforts of business and financial communities that will allow us to make the progress that's so desperately needed. Well-informed capital markets are critical to these efforts. Given the right information, capital markets will accurately price risk and effectively allocate capital to enterprises that are the most resilient and the best at avoiding, managing, and mitigating risk. This is no less true for the risks we all face due to climate change than it is for the traditional financial, operational, or reputational risks. As the potential effects of climate change and efforts to address those effects are increasingly acknowledged, investments taking them into account have begun to follow. Green bonds and sustainability-linked loans have become increasingly popular. According to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, global sustainable debt issuance grew from $112 billion in 2016, this is dollars, to $247 billion in 2018 as the market innovated to meet the demands of investors. However, it is estimated that through 2030, green global infrastructure investment of around $93 trillion will be needed to meet climate change commitments. In the energy sector alone, achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement is estimated to require around $3.5 trillion on average in investments per year for the foreseeable future. So there's a clear gap between the current levels of investment and those needed to move to a low-carbon economy. At the same time, we are beginning to see the results of early investments in sustainable technologies. Among others, falling solar and wind energy generation costs, and an increase in electric cars on the road, and growing battery storage capacity have the potential to transform industry within the next decade. Renewable energy sources, including solar and wind, accounted for more than 2/3 of net energy capacity growth around the world in 2017, with almost 178 gigawatts of power coming online that year. Renewable energy capacity is also forecast to expand by 46%, over 1 terawatt in the next 5 years. The IEA found that over 1 million electric cars were sold in 2017, a new record, with more than half of global sales in China. The total number of electric cars on the road surpassed 3 million worldwide, an expansion of over 50% since 2016. In its 2018 New Energy Outlook, Bloomberg New Energy Finance anticipates that the cost of battery storage will decrease significantly. The World Bank Group recently committed $1 billion for a new global program to accelerate investments in battery storage for energy systems in developing and middle-income countries. Investors and the companies in which they invest must consider their longer-term strategies and most efficient allocation of capital in light of the potential economic impacts, both the risks and the opportunities of climate change. Companies that engage in activities that are more susceptible to climate-related risks will be less resilient to the transition to a lower carbon economy, and their investors may experience lower returns. On the other hand, companies that are well-positioned on sustainability and climate issues are likely to produce better returns for their investors over the longer term. For example, in 2018, the median total return for ESG-focused ETFs outperformed the median total return for all ETFs by 4.5%. A recent study found that transitioning to a low-carbon, sustainable growth path could deliver a direct economic gain of $26 trillion through 2030 compared to business as usual. Markets are very powerful forces, and it's critical to fuel those forces by providing the international business community with the information it needs to make meaningful progress in directing investment to the most sustainable assets and investments. Transparency into climate risks and actions to manage and mitigate those risks enables asset managers and owners, insurers and lenders to make financial decisions that minimize risk and allocate resources efficiently and profitably. Without companies providing adequate disclosure to investors, the investment gap will persist as the financial community struggles to accurately assess which companies are best prepared in the face of climate change. The Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure was created just to help companies disclose information in a clear and consistent way, allowing investors to better understand their financial exposure to climate risk. This work is a solution by the market for the market, a group of private sector experts working to encourage sound risk management and facilitate smart allocation of capital in the transition to a low-carbon economy. Rather than the traditional measure of a company's impact on climate and environment, we look at this through the lens of what is the impact of climate change on the company. And ultimately, given the interconnectedness of financial institutions and the increasing scale and likelihood of climate impacts, what does this collective disclosure tell us about managing the risks to the financial system broadly? The TCFD's 2017 report provided voluntary recommendations for companies to develop more effective climate-related financial disclosures through their existing reporting processes. Utilizing 4 pillars, governance, strategy, risk management, and targets and metrics, the TCFD asks companies to disclose how they think about, measure, manage, and mitigate climate risk. The recommendations help companies disclose key information to investors, lenders, insurers, and other stakeholders in mainstream filings, and our focus is on financial impact. But even beyond disclosure, the TCFD framework helps companies with their internal governance and processes around climate risk, ensuring that climate risk informs their risk management broadly and their strategic planning. Companies can more effectively measure and evaluate their own risks and those of their suppliers and competitors. Since the release of the final report in June of 2017, the task force has worked extensively with global companies, stock exchanges, NGOs, and industry groups to encourage implementation of the recommendations. Our 2018 status report, released in September, shows that while many companies do report on environmental issues, most have yet to specifically provide the market with consistent information about the financial implications of climate change for their business. This year, the task force will continue to promote and monitor adoption of the recommendations and will deliver a second status report in June 2019. We believe the success of the TCFD recommendations depends on widespread adoption by companies in the financial and non-financial sectors. Through widespread adoption, climate-related risks and opportunities will become a natural part of a company's risk management and strategic planning processes. To date, more than 590 global organizations with total market cap approaching $9 trillion and responsible for $107 trillion in assets have expressed their support for the TCFD. I'm pleased to say that Japanese individuals and organizations have made significant contributions to the momentum behind the TCFD framework. Nearly 10% of TCFD supporters, over 55 organizations, are Japanese. This includes JPX, which has stated that it is vital to integrate ESG factors into the investment process to ensure sustainable returns. And last year, the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry developed its own guidance on TCFD-aligned disclosure for companies, and METI established the Joint Public-Private Sector Study Group on implementing TCFD recommendations for mobilizing green finance through proactive corporate disclosure. Continuing the good work this year, the Japanese G20 presidency has made sure that climate issues are on the global agenda in 2019. The TCFD recommendations have been discussed by Japanese task force members and other supporters at numerous events held here in Japan, and the audience here today is illustrative of the great work of Japan in the work of the TCFD. Some of the potential benefits associated with implementing the TCFD recommendations include easier or better access to capital by increasing investors' and lenders' confidence that the company's climate-related risks are appropriately assessed and managed, more effectively meeting existing disclosure requirements to report material information in financial filings, increased awareness and understanding of climate-related risks and opportunities within the company, resulting in better risk management and more informed strategic planning, and proactively addressing investors' demands for climate-related information in a framework that investors are increasingly asking for, which could ultimately reduce the number of climate-related information requests that companies individually receive. It is time for today's leaders to begin using the framework to assert their leadership and be part of the solution to the problem we face globally. The financial community must make clear that information is key to facilitating sustainable business models, opening new markets, and channeling investment to green solutions. Companies must continue to work to demonstrate responsibility and resiliency in managing risks and opportunities with an eye towards a sustainable future. Industry groups and other organizations must facilitate necessary progress by developing tools, resources, and best practices. And investors must effectively and routinely incorporate climate risk in their capital allocation decision-making. Ultimately, we aim for the TCFD recommendations to be commonplace in financial disclosures, which will in turn lead to more transparent markets, more secure and stable economies, and faster progress against the harmful effects of climate change. There is real power in market forces beyond the generation of short-term profits. We can all do well by doing good, and we have an obligation to leave the world better by our efforts. We can still make a difference, but the time to act is now, and harnessing market forces is essential to our progress. Please join with us. Thank you so much.